everybody. Welcome to the Someone Like Me season finale live stream. We're celebrating a full first season of this incredible podcast made possible by the Jones Legacy Group. So we want to be sure to thank them for their generous support. If you are watching and you listened to the show, thank you. Your listenership was incredibly encouraging as we went along the way telling these stories, busting myths, and we're so grateful to be here for your questions. This is what today is all about. Whether you had questions about survivors or about any of the myths we talked about or domestic human trafficking in general, there are a couple experts on this stream who can give us a lot of important information. So let me take a second to introduce who you're seeing on the screen. My name is Leslie. I got the privilege and honor to host this season of Someone Like Me, talking to survivors, telling their stories. We have Margie Quin, who is the CEO of End Slavery Tennessee. Derri Smith, who is the founder of End Slavery Tennessee, and Gregory Byerline, who is the producer, editor, and kind of the brains behind this whole show and the impetus for why it's here. So thank you all on the screen for being here. Again, this is to answer your questions. So if you have any questions that come up, you can just put them in the comments below, and we want to spend a good amount of time talking about those questions. That's what this is all about. While you do that, we have a couple things we want to touch on. We want to share a clip or two that some of us thought were important from this season, and then tell you some ways you can get involved with End Slavery Tennessee and their work. This first season, we covered a ton of topics, and every story was different. Like there was vulnerability, addiction, domestic violence, demand, HIV, grooming, so many topics that were wide-ranging. And one of the first clips that Derri actually submitted as being an important clip that she kind of thought was really something we need to relook at was a clip from Stephanie's episode, the very first Survivor episode we ever had. So let's play that clip, and then Derri, you can tell us more about why you chose it. What did your life look like before your experience that brought you to End Slavery Tennessee?
Before my experience that brought me to End Slavery Tennessee, so like childhood, teenage years. As a child, wasn't very well. To me, I guess it was normal because it's the only thing that I knew. But I had an alcoholic father and a mother who struggled with addiction. My father left when I was 2 years old, and not only did my mother struggle with addiction, but she, I guess she sought out different men. So there would be random men who would stay the night. I know she got married about 5 times. So there was sexual abuse from some of those men. My mother was very emotionally detached, sometimes not even physically present. I remember at one point I was maybe 12 years old and left in charge of my brother and sister for 2 weeks. And she went on a rendezvous with one of her biker husbands, and we had ramen noodles.
I think that might have clipped off at the end. She said we had ramen noodles for 2 weeks. Derri, can you tell us more about why you chose this clip?
Sure. I think Stephanie's story illustrates what we see in almost every survivor story, some clear indicators of things that make people more vulnerable to human trafficking. In her case, we saw an addicted parent. We saw neglect. I mean, at 12 years old, she's left for 2 weeks to take care of her younger siblings. And we see child abuse, which is present in almost every survivor story. Other indicators might be domestic violence or other kinds of trauma. So really, I think it's so important to realize that every state needs to have a system in place that flags those indicators and intervenes with services for those young people before trafficking ever happens.
I remember you telling the story in this time that we've been talking, developing the show, about the importance of you founding End Slavery Tennessee as being a regional program. So it's not it's not a national, but with the idea that if you can be a regional program, you can really affect and impact, get involved with law enforcement, and have kind of a deeper cut in what's happening. And that's one of the really awesome things about how In Slavery Tennessee works. And a lot of people ask how they can get involved. The first way we want to tell you about, Margie, I'll have you take over and tell us about Voices of Freedom, which is the yearly fundraiser. So Margie, go ahead and tell us about that and how people can get involved.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. So on October 1st of this year, we'll celebrate our annual gala. Obviously, we usually have it in person, and it's a fantastic event. But this year, we're going virtual, and you can stream the event. Yes, we were going to have it at Loveless Cafe, but they are now going to be providing the meals. You can buy a table for 10 folks. If you have a big family or a close-knit family of friends, mask up and get some great Loveless meals and stream that there at your house or on your back patio. This is something that we've never done before, but couples tickets are going to go on sale today. So we're thrilled to announce that those can come with a meal or without a meal, and you would get access to the live stream as well as the live auction that's going to be going on. So I encourage you to go to our website and learn more about the Voices of Freedom. There are going to be some short films that are going to be similar to the Someone Like Me monologues. These stories, these are actual survivor stories acted out. It's going to be tremendously impactful. There's going to be some live music and an update on everything that's going on at In Slavery Tennessee. So go to our website and check out the opportunity to join our virtual live streaming Voices of Freedom.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm so excited because I get to host and MC the thing, and I'm so giddy. It's going to be amazing. And I think what's really neat is the Someone Like Me name is actually what you're calling these monologues, these short films. And what's so cool about that is Gregory, and last year there was actually a monologue event as well. And that's what you saw that kind of led to the idea of doing this show. So there's this string that's just pulling everything together. And even the phrase "someone like me" is very, very close to the In Slavery Tennessee family. It came from a survivor who was on a phone call with TBI, which included Margie, the CEO, where she uttered the phrase "someone like me." And if you want to hear the whole conversation, her name is Nicole. It's episode 7. And Gregory, you actually sent in one of her clips as something you kind of thought we could touch on. So while you're asking questions, after this clip, we're going to get to your questions and spend a lot of time on that. But let's play Nicole's clip really quick. And then Gregory, you can kind of tell us what you took away from it.
Sure.
You never really know where you are in your healing process until you're presented with a situation. And I thought I wanted to be far enough along that I knew I wanted to be that survivor that helps the next one, like my mentor did for me. I wanted to be somebody's hope, somebody's light, and I wanted it so badly. I wanted to do whatever I possibly could to help. And so that meant going on this sting operation. And it was really cool to see the work and the effort that people do to try to help these girls, even if they don't see it as help at the time, because I know when it happened to me and I got busted, it felt like my walls were coming down. However, this thing was successful on TBI's side of it. On my end of it, I actually had to walk outside of the building. It was too much for me. It was too familiar to be seeing it. It was kind of like deja vu, and it triggered me in such a way that I had to go process after, and that's kind of when my mentor saw she's not quite there yet.
Yeah, Gregory, tell us what struck you about that.
Overall, what struck me was just Nicole herself. I mean, that is a serious amount of bravery to willingly go back to a situation that could be and clearly was so triggering. She went through unimaginable treatment and mistreatment, and to be willing to help pay it forward, then also be someone's light, as she said, and to be a help to someone who was going through that also. But fresh out of a sting, like literally on location, I just can't I can't wrap my head around that. And Nicole, if you're listening, thank you for doing that and for bravery that you clearly have. And I'm grateful that you are with End Slavery Tennessee to work through all of that junk.
The bravery for all of the survivors, you kind of get to the end of a conversation and you just have to thank them for opening themselves up to reliving things. And Nicole's conversation in particular was very raw. And if you haven't listened to that episode, I highly suggest that you take a listen. It's an incredible story that involves Margie when she was working for TBI, which she did for many years. So, well, let's transition to question and answer time. And this is what this stream is all about. We have a few pre-submitted questions and we have some questions in the comments. So let's just jump into it. What's our first question? What is something new that you learned about this important work through the process of making the podcast that you didn't know before? Yeah, that's great. I'm going to start, and then I think I'll let a lot of the questions we tend to get, the experts have to handle because we're kind of we don't know as much as Derri and Margie, but Gregory and I can talk about this one. One very specific thing that I remember in one of the interviews, there's a very common thread when we're talking about domestic violence, and this is a very generational sort of a crime oftentimes. And I just started thinking about these people, these survivors, when they were in elementary school, middle school, and comparing that to my experience. As an elementary school kid, I typically got the right amount of sleep. I had a quiet house at nighttime. I was able to do my homework. But for a child who maybe their mom was involved with trafficking, or maybe they even were being trafficked themselves, there are all these forces at play that how in the world could you learn and have a normal childhood? And then let's say by the time, if you do get out of trafficking or even abuse and you get to adulthood, there's so much that's missed. And I just kind of had one of those comparative experiences where I went, this is all so wrapped up in so many things with abuse and neglect and domestic violence. And so that was one of the things that I think I realized is looking for those red flags instead of just, oh, the child's not paying attention or they're acting out. What could be going on at home that's causing this? So that's one of the very specific things I took away.
Yeah, and I appreciated the fact that organizations like End Slavery Tennessee exist on the back end, on the restoration side. It's one thing to leave that lifestyle, whether rescued out or saved from a sting operation or just, an escape of sorts. But it's another to have a safe place to go to, an organization with resources to help you get back on your feet and work through that trauma. That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. Derri, Margie, do you have anything you want to share there, or do we want to go on to the next question? Go on. Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Amy, for that question. That's great. What's the next one? Oh, yeah. So End Slavery has community groups around town. And so the Brentwood Community Group asked, why would a victim go back to their trafficker? And why would that feel safe to them?
I'll take that one. I think there are so many reasons. First of all, the victim has been groomed by their trafficker, and a lot of times they're showered with gifts during that grooming process. A lot of times trauma bonds form, and then the trafficker will turn around and make them feel like they owe something for the things they've been given. Also, victims often see their traffickers as almost omnipresent. I'm sure the traffickers are perpetuating that image. And so they feel like no matter where they go, that trafficker is going to know where they are and you're going to be able to find them. And so they fear the repercussions. They often don't trust law enforcement or government agencies in general, sometimes because they've been let down by the system somewhere along the way in their past. But probably the biggest thing of all is a sense that they don't have any options, and this is all they know. And that's why it's so important for an agency like End Slavery Tennessee to be there right from the beginning, to build trust, to assure that victim that they will be kept safe, that they'll receive comprehensive services, and that will be there as long as the support is needed.
Yeah. Immediately, that question makes me think of the episode with Callie, who was she was in her 30s when she was trafficked, and it was 2 years from meeting her trafficker until it was actually happening to her. And in that 2 year, the episode is essentially, she really wanted to talk about grooming. And so really that would be a great episode to listen to understand exactly why someone wouldn't leave a trafficker. Manipulation is strong, and we all, if we're vulnerable, can be put in some precarious situations that are very difficult to leave. So thank you for that question. Should we go on to the next one? What has become of the traffickers who abuse these survivors? Oh, that's a good question. Margie, maybe you can handle that one.
Yeah. So in some cases, obviously, these traffickers are prosecuted. Many victims do want to see justice or seek justice through conviction. And I can tell you that on the enforcement side, we were always far more successful with that when a victim had been through services at End Slavery Tennessee, because they're there to walk that really tough journey with law enforcement and the court system, which can be triggering and painful and adversarial. So many times the victim is sort of put on trial herself. And so in some cases, they do not seek justice. And those reasons can be pretty complicated. It's really tough if you've been the victim of familial trafficking. So if your mother, your brother, your father, your uncle trafficked you, those relationships can be so complicated. And many times victims of trafficking, especially familial trafficking, do not want the responsibility and the added trauma of putting their mother in jail or their father in jail or their brother in jail. And so for different reasons, there are different outcomes on trafficking cases. But I think that more and more, at least over the last 5 years, we are seeing more and more convictions for trafficking. And I would say, not just because I'm now the CEO at End Slavery Tennessee, but I can tell you that in large part, that is because of the kind of services that End Slavery Tennessee can deliver for a victim.
One of the things that has come up in this season that I'd love if you could talk a little bit more about, Margie, are the laws that have changed and how, and I can't remember the year, but at some point there was a time when child prostitution, a child could be criminally charged with prostitution, and that has changed, which has affected traffickers, right? I mean, there are more convictions because the laws have changed, right? Am I
Sure. Yes,
that?
absolutely. So in some ways, we have broken down barriers by creating great state policy. So one of the first things we did as a state when we started looking and recognizing trafficking for the problem that it was decriminalize prostitution for minors. And that happened in 2011. We were one of the first 4 states in the nation to decriminalize prostitution for minors. That doesn't mean we made prostitution legal. It means we were just no longer charging children with prostitution. And so when the code is in conflict, so you had part of the code that said these children were victims of trafficking, and then you had another area of the criminal code that said, no, these kids are criminals. We can't have conflict like that within the Tennessee Code Annotated. So once we did that, we could really start to educate law enforcement and the community and the media about, there is no such thing as child prostitution. There is no such thing as teen prostitution. And so that kind of broke down the barriers and started this kind of landslide of opportunities for new laws. Instead of it now being a misdemeanor to purchase a child for sex, is if the child is under the age of 15, it's a Class A felony, which is the same charge as murder, for instance. Mm-hmm. So the state has taken really seriously this idea of the buying and selling of our children. And in 2014, we actually changed the trafficking statute to add purchasing in, so that, and the legislature's intent there is to make sure that people who go out and intentionally purchase a child for sex can be charged under the trafficking statute. That's not solicitation for prostitution or just regular solicitation, which is a Class C felony. It is, in most cases, either an A or B felony. A felony if it's under 15, B felony if it's 15 to 18.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's move on to the next question. Is there somewhere in Maury County that I could support and offer some kind of volunteer work? Ooh, great question. Derri, Margie, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So we've got a great Spring Hill group that we would love to get you in touch with. We have community groups around the metro area that do various fundraisers and awareness events. We have a speakers bureau so that we train you to go out and speak to community groups, civic groups, so that you raise awareness about trafficking and how it impacts your area. The TBI's, one of their last sting operations actually was in Spring Hill, and I want to say they arrested about 11 men in Spring Hill for either solicitation or trafficking. And so that's a great question. And if you will contact us, send in an email to the agency, we will get you hooked up with the right community group, and we'd love to have you on board.
That's great. This might be a good time to touch on Hands of Hope as well, for other people who are interested to know how they can be involved within slavery and what they're doing in a financial way. Maybe they're too busy with, being able to actively volunteer. So, Margie, please tell us about Hands of Hope.
Yeah, thank you. And this is a great time to join Hands of Hope. Hands of Hope is a monthly giving program. You go on the website, first thing you're going to see is a give button. Hit that give button and it'll take you to a screen where you can select either a one-time gift or a monthly gift. You can start as low as $5 a month. So basically you can give us a cup of coffee every month. It's a great way to start if you're new to charitable giving. Right now, we have a donor who's going to match every first-time gift in Hands of Hope. And that is just fantastic. Mm-hmm. So what that does for In Slavery Tennessee is give us the confidence and peace of mind to know that we're going to get a certain amount of donations, a certain influx of resources into our agency each month. So we can then start to really plan our operations and our restorative options for survivors. For instance, this month we have been helping a young survivor, a juvenile survivor, prepare for her first year in college. So we've been helping her kind of outfit her dorm and get her school supplies. And cool. if you become a member of Hands of Hope, that's the kind of stuff that your money's going to go to help. It's going to help these survivors get back on their feet and get going again.
That's fantastic. And you can see on the screen, there's a specific URL you can go to for that. Let's do another question. I think we have a couple more that have come through. And ask if any question comes up, ask it in the comments. If we get more questions, we want to stay at getting done at 12:30, so within half an hour. If we have more questions, we're going to just roll over into a sort of encore with those questions. But let's get to the next one. Okay, what is the best way to handle a situation where labor trafficking appears to be at play? Is calling the human trafficking hotline the best way? Would calling the police get the young men in more trouble? I think there was a longer sort of preface there about this person thought they saw some young men maybe being labor trafficked. That was a conversation that we hope to get to in a future season. So, Derri, do you want to talk about that?
Actually, Margie was going to handle
Margie,
that one.
Go for it.
Yep. Yeah, thanks. So I think what we're talking about is young people that you see going around and selling various magazines or other products. we've seen all kinds of different schemes. I'm putting my law enforcement hat back on. We've seen all kinds of different schemes that do appear to be labor trafficking, and they affect young people. And we've seen it impact elderly senior citizens who are forced to engage in different activities that appear to be labor trafficking. And so I would always encourage anybody to call the human trafficking hotline. It's really important that hotline sort of intakes all the information, centralizes that information. That way they can put the sort of pieces of the puzzle together, because you may get calls in Brentwood one day for a group that's out selling magazines, but you may get calls the next day in Spring Hill or in Nolensville. And so being able to track that information across our geographical area then becomes very important, not just for law enforcement, but for In Slavery Tennessee. It helps us plan for the number of survivors that we're going to be asked to get involved with and deliver services to. Labor trafficking does look very different than sex trafficking. Sometimes they do go hand in hand, where you see labor, that you'll see a sex trafficking as well. But labor is very different, and it involves forced labor, forced work for little to no compensation. Typically, you're separated from paperwork, so that might be driver's license or visa or birth certificate, and then there can be threats of violence or other threats and coercion to force those people into work. So that's a great question.
Yeah, that's
Call
great.
the hotline.
Call the hotline. Next question. I think we had another live question that came through. As a college student, what are the best signals to look for when red flags don't seem as obvious for our demographic? Well, that's a good question. Mm-hmm. So college students. Derri, do you want to start with that one?
Sure, I'll start. I think there are so many red flags, so a lot of times you just have to try to trust your gut when you know something's wrong. And as a student, you have access to what's going on with your peers that other people don't, that older people don't. And so if somebody has suddenly changed, if they suddenly have an older boyfriend who seems to be always there and answering questions for them, if they suddenly, their studies have dropped, they're missing classes, there could be so many signs that are happening. And what I'd encourage you to do is to go to our website. We have a pretty comprehensive list of red flags. They're broken down even by the ones more likely for minors and older people. Obviously, if you see one or two of those red flags, it doesn't necessarily mean trafficking. But if you sense something's wrong and you see some of those red flags, it's always better to speak up. Call the hotline. We're told by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agents, they'd rather you be wrong and call than you be right and not call.
That's great. Margie, do you have anything to add to that? Nope, all good? Okay. I think we have another question. And actually, let's go ahead and just, for those people that need to get off, could only join us for a half hour, we're going to just wrap up really quickly, and then we're going to come back on this same stream. So you don't have to worry about finding a new link or anything. But we wanted to take just a brief moment to remind you to subscribe to the podcast, Someone Like Me. Even though the first season is done, we're actively planning on season 2, gathering topics, gathering survivors that want to tell their stories. And so your support can actually make that happen. Joan's Legacy Group made season 1 happen. We're so grateful. And the more people listen, the more people give, we can actually make this thing happen for a second season. So inslaverytn.org, and the podcast links are very findable. It's very easy to find them. So if you listened this season, thank you. We thank you. The survivors thank you. It's important. Just by listening, it educates us so much to just listen to other people's stories. So thank you for everyone who's joined us for this first half hour. Hang on, we're going to roll right into more questions. I think we have some more questions. And so if you can stay online with us, please do. So thanks for joining us. And we're going to play our little video thing before we come back. So bye, everybody. right, welcome back. Okay, so yeah, we had a few additional questions. So if you're still with us, thank you. Let's get to the next one. What other organizations besides In Slavery Tennessee help with capturing traffickers? Since we talked specifically about domestic human trafficking, I think let's start there.
Okay.
Derri?
I'll jump in there. I think this is a really good opportunity to dispel another myth. And Slavery Tennessee does not rescue victims or capture traffickers. That is the job of law enforcement. So in our state, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, local law enforcement agencies are the ones who are going to be doing that work. And that's important because, first of all, for others to engage in rescue is dangerous for the victim, for themselves, for any law enforcement that chooses to, that engages at any point. They have to worry about your safety then too. It just complicates the situation. And also law enforcement knows what it takes to make a strong case in court. And somebody else, wouldn't it be so sad to get a victim out and then screw up the legal proceedings afterwards so that the trafficker got away? What we do is provide services. And by providing those services, victims become much more likely to get to the place in their healing process to testify against their trafficker so that there is prosecution, as well as to be able to really access the services that they need for their healing journey. Now, we do advocate for law changes, and we do that very successfully. Margie alluded to that. We do participate in law enforcement stings or operations so that we can be there to comfort a victim and to assure them of the options that they do have. But we do not conduct rescue operations or capture traffickers.
That's great. Yep, another good myth to dispel.
Right.
Awesome. Thanks, Derri. All right, next question. As an intern at In Slavery Tennessee a couple years ago, I noticed that many survivors struggled with seizure disorders. About a year ago, I decided that I wanted to become a physician and plan to continue working with high-risk populations. Are there any particular signs that physicians and providers should look for? Are there any types of medical care that survivors are needing more of? This is interesting. This isn't something that I myself noticed. So, Derri, Margie, go ahead and take that one.
Yeah, that's a great question. We know that survivors, some 80% of survivors are bumping up into the system in the first couple of months that they're trafficked. And many times those systems are medical systems, so they're health departments and doctors' offices, emergency rooms. Many times these cases are going to mask and look like domestic violence because it may be the trafficker that comes in. And as Derri has very eloquently said, through the grooming process, the trafficked person is going to refer to the trafficker as her boyfriend. She's going to think they're in a romantic relationship. And we see victims who sustain severe trauma, physical trauma, as a result of their trafficking. And that trauma can be delivered by the trafficker, it can be delivered by a buyer. And so we know that helping train the medical profession is a great opportunity to get information on survivors. We regularly receive referrals from the medical community. That's hospitals. Hospitals now have great social worker programs. And so we'll get a call from a social worker at one of the local hospitals and we'll respond. One of the children's hospitals, health departments, where you've got a victim that comes in is being treated for an injury or an illness and get a referral that way. So that's why that training and education, that advocacy part is so important. The more we train, the more we educate, frankly, the more referrals we get. So the outreach that we're doing at In Slavery Tennessee to that medical community, to those other community partners that are seeing trafficking victims, when we go out and we do that education, the referral numbers just explode for us.
And I'll just add, hi, Rachel. And I'm so thrilled that your internship with us led you down that career path. I'll say we've seen a lot of interns do that have their career paths changed by the experience. It's a very unique experience to be an intern with End Slavery Tennessee, a competitive process too, but something you might consider.
Yeah, actually, why don't you talk more about the internship process? Because that's something I don't know much about, and maybe people who are watching might be compelled to look into it.
Well, it may have changed since my days, so I'm going to let Margie take that one.
Yeah, just you can hit our website again. The link I think is going to be in this live Facebook event. You can apply to be an intern. We are always looking for great interns, both on the direct service side as well as the development side, marketing, finance, HR. Depends on kind of what you're interested in, but we could certainly use interns of all different stripes, at the agency, and we love to have that kind of new burst of energy into the workplace. So go to our website, and you'll be able to find the internship applications.
Awesome. All right, let's do another question. Let's see if we can at least do one more. What is it with Memphis? Stephanie mentions a whole group of traffickers from Memphis. Yeah, and actually, I feel like Memphis came up a couple times in this season. So what, this is a very localized question for Tennessee. What about Memphis makes it unique? Margie, Derri? Either one of you?
I'll jump in and start, and Margie can finish up.
Awesome.
Things that come to mind is that Memphis actually has a sort of unique trafficking culture. It's a little more in your face and out on the street, and part of that is because a lot of trafficking is, as mentioned before, generational. So you have whole families who, that's just the profession of their family, and father teaches son. You have gang activity, and where gangs are, you often find trafficking related, where maybe a new recruit to the gang is given the task of recruiting a young girl from a school or whatever, and they use that girl to make money for gang activities. And also, I think there's an economic drive in Memphis maybe that is strong, and this is a money-driven problem. Traffickers are in this for one reason, for money. Margie?
Yeah, I don't think I'd have too much to add to that. I think when you've got an area that where you have children living below the poverty level, and you've got an increased amount of street gang activity, this is a great opportunity for gangs to sell a reusable product. You can only sell a gun or a drug one time, but you can sell a person over and over again. So Memphis does have its fair share of gangs, unfortunately, and we see them engaged in trafficking as a money-making opportunity.
That's good to know. Well, I think that wraps all of the questions that we have been sent in. If you have any more questions, you can go to endslaverytn.org and ask them there. We've been more than happy to talk with you about those questions that you have. By way of wrap up, I want to get Gregory's voice in here. He has been so good to sit here, and the work that Gregory has done on this show is just been absolutely amazing. And the only reason I'm really involved is because it was important to us that there be a female voice that's talking with survivors. But Gregory listens to these conversations afterwards, and he has 2 daughters himself. And so, Gregory, would love your kind of last thoughts before we wrap up.
Well, first, I have enjoyed this session as well as our launch, just to be in the same digital room with such outstanding women like you three and everyone involved at End Slavery Tennessee who has helped on an administrative and support end. It was a wild hair idea, and I'm delighted that Derri caught the vision for it, and we were able to pull this off for a first season. And I just want to add that though the first season of new podcasts has come to an end, there in every podcast player. Apple Podcasts.
Hey, Gregory, say that again,
the biggest one.
You went robotic for like probably about 15
Did
seconds.
I? Wow.
You did.
Okay.
I don't know if
Sure.
that's the storms that are rolling in, but it was right after you said, even though this has come to an end.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even though season 1 of Someone Like Me has come to an end, those episodes are still available through your chosen podcast player. The big ones are Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts for Android users. They're also on Spotify. They're, pick your podcast player app, Luminary, Stitcher, Deezer, Overcast, Castro. I mean, they're virtually everywhere. Just search Someone Like Me and look for the green square and you'll see it. Each of those players has the little curved arrow that is a share feature. So if you come across an episode that somebody would be interested in hearing, you can share directly from there.
It's also worth mentioning that the website has an embed player for each episode as well. Yes. Each episode has its own page. So if you don't have a smartphone, because there are people out there who don't have smartphones, or you want to share it with somebody who might not be technologically savvy, we all know those people. You could just go to the website and find the link for the individual episode and share it that way. So
all of season 1 is available, and subscribe so they automatically come to you, because I'm pretty certain there's going to be a couple bonus episodes in between seasons. I'm going to do a little hint there. But again, thank you for listening. We do this to have these stories heard and to make them shareable, and podcasting is the platform for that. I have withdrawn the idea of video podcasts because we definitely want to keep the survivor's identity anonymous. So the audio podcast is the medium for stories like these. Mm-hmm. So please subscribe and keep your ears peeled for season 2 as it comes along.
Yep. And remember, tickets, couple tickets for the Voices of Freedom event, which is happening October 1st, have gone available today, or have become available today. You get a nice dinner from Loveless, and then you get to join us for a virtual gala to help support In Slavery Tennessee, and then look into Hands of Hope, which is the monthly giving program for In Slavery. So everyone, it was so good to see all of you, and thank you for watching at home as dogs come in and out. I'm sure you've been seeing my dog. She needs to go outside, I think. So thank you everybody for watching, and it was good to see all of you again. And remember to subscribe and rate and review the show, and we will see you in season 2.
Thank you very much.
Bye.